Hi, good day. Today we continue with our series on financial investing in financial instruments, and today we'll be talking about this is class 3, and we're talking about macro and micro indices. So, you probably would have heard of a lot of things like they've heard words like MPRO, inflation rates, and they all look very abstract to you, and you're wondering, what has this got to do with me, saying I'm not a finance person? But fortunately, the world we live today, you have to know some sort of finance to effectively manage your money. Do you get? So the first one is monetary policy rates. So MPRO rates, benchmark interest rate set by the central bank. It's the benchmark rate set by the central bank. It's actually the rate for all that controls all lending or borrowing in a country. So it's usually set above inflation rates. That way, the idea is set above inflation rates such that when you use it as a benchmark rate, so it controls the rate at which bank will give loans. So that way, when bank gives you loan at this rate, it is not necessarily at the MPR rate, but using the MPR rate as a benchmark. When they give you a rate, that rate would be, when they get their money back, the value of the money wouldn't have dropped. So their returns will be real returns to it. So at the end of the day, although currently some banks would, MPR rate is 27. Some banks will borrow you money at a rate of 27, but the real returns for the bank is actually, inflation rate currently is like 18%. So the real returns for the bank is actually 27 minus 18. So if they borrow you below 18%, they are at a negative because inflation rate is currently 18%, at least for this month. For last month, okay, so that's where the MPRO rate comes in. It determines a lot of things, not just lending rate for governments and for banks. It's also the rate at which all lending rates, so the rate at which treasury bills, government securities are issued, the rate at which government borrow money from people in terms of treasury bills and all. So those and FGM bonds, those rates are also determined or guided. They consider the MPR rates before they decide, so that at the end of the day, the rates they are giving you when you're lending money to them is actually competitive with inflation rates. So the value of your money after the time frame is positive. So when you're going to borrow somebody your money or lend an institution, whether a bank or a government, your money, what you should be looking at is what's the MPR rates and what's the inflation rates. So the next thing here is inflation rates. Inflation is the percentage change in the average price of goods and services over a period of time. So the average price of goods and services increases or decreases over a period of time. So that is the time, that is called, calculating that price is called inflation rate. When it's calculated, it's called inflation rate. Now, the people that do it in Nigeria is Nigerian Bureau of Statistics. So you probably have heard inflation rate this month is this inflation rate. Current inflation rate is 18%. It dropped from 20%. At the beginning of this year, it was like 24% or so. So it is dropping. So it can drop. Last year, it was as high as 33%, and it was increasing because of the FX devaluation. So those are things you consider. Inflation rate can be high, it can be low. So when they calculate it, they usually don't say, they can, some countries will say CPI number, consumer price index. They are still talking about inflation. So in the US, they'll tell you the CPI for this month is, so I think the last US CPI number was like 3%. So depending on when you're listening to this video, this was for I'm talking of September 2025. So depending on, so that's so you can hear CPI number, you can hear inflation rates. They are saying same thing. can be low. There is what they call deflation. So sharp drop in the price of, or consistently sharp drop in the price of goods and service is what you are calling deflation. So if you have a consistent sharp drop, it drops from 24 to 20, then to 16, then to, that sharp drop is called deflation. Some people are a bit hesitant about sharp deflation because when you look, none of these indices are looked in isolation. Most times when you look at these indices, you look at it in comparison with something else. So if there's a deflation, now you're looking at your GDP numbers. Is your economy still going even with a sharp deflationary trend? So those are the things you now want to look at. That's why, yes, maybe countries could do that such that they could have a deflation, but a deflation is not necessarily a good thing, especially if the growth in the country is stunted. So you want to balance growth with inflation rate drop. So like we said, consumer price index, this is how inflation is calculated. Now, when you're calculating inflation, there are different components all brought together in a basket. You have housing, rates of increase of housing, rate of increase of transport, health, education for Nigeria, energy, data, all those stuff adds to the inflation rate. So that's why you see when during the month there's an increase in PMS price, petrol price, you see that the inflation for that month sometimes increases slightly because of PMS. Like the last one that dropped to 18%, it was actually because we are in harvest season, so food price has dropped sharply. Food price dropped to like 16%, which is really, really low. I've seen this year 40% actually as food inflation. So for food inflation to drop to 16%, that's a significant drop. So that was one of the things that contributed to the 18%. Prior to then, that of August, I think it was energy prices that dropped. So depending, the different components could actually affect the inflation rates. And inflation rates are calculated month by month or year by year. You can compare August to September. You can compare last year October to this year October. So that is calculated as consumer price index. Then stagflation. Stagflation is when you have two things, inflation and stagnation. So you are high inflation and stagnation. So you are having increase in inflation in prices of goods and services. There's no growth in your country, and there's increase in unemployment. GDP numbers are down, and then there's unemployment, and you're having high inflation. Why it's a bit puzzling? You would think that if there is increase in price of goods and services, that means businesses are growing. And so if businesses are growing, they should be employing, right? You get if prices are increasing, it's the businesses that are taking it, so they should be increasing. So you have a kind of oxymoron when you have that in existence, and then your country GDP, there's no growth. You get the number of goods and services that are being produced is not increasing, and then you also have unemployment. So where is the money going into? How come they are not employing people? So that's stagflation for you. Then we have GDP. So like I said, most of these indices are not they are not just in isolation. So if you look at inflation, you would look at MPR number. You would also look at GDP number. You also want to look at population growth numbers. That's when it makes sense, because GDP is actually total value of goods and services produced in a country over a time. So you could have GDP for quarters. So last Nigeria, quarter 3, 2025, quarter 2, I don't think quarter 3 is out. Quarter 2, 2025 GDP numbers was as high as 4.2. That is high compared to what we've been seeing over the last 365 days. I think that's like one of the highest, So what contributed to this? I think from what I read, the non-oil export actually did that. The non-oil export and non-oil sector actually increased our GDP significantly. And then we have NMPC now remitting money back to the federal coffers. So there is a lot of things increasing. So GDP, when you're talking of goods that you produce in the country, total value. So if the goods you produce in one quarter is greater than the goods you could produce in the second quarter in terms of value, then your GDP increases. It's calculated in percentage anyway. So your GDP increases. So there's what they call base year. So when you calculate, when you're doing change, you're changing, there's always, if you're science students, initial, final minus initial, all over. So you use your base year is almost like an initial year that you are using to do that difference between 2 years. So you probably have heard the beginning of this year, rebasing. So your base year. So your base year does that. It's your base year. So Nigeria initially was using, was it 2014 or 2010? Every 6 years you are supposed to change your base year. So it hasn't been done in Nigeria for a while. So beginning of this year they moved it, I think, to 2019 for the GDP. So that's the base year. That will probably be the initial they are using to do the difference. I don't know. That will probably be the initial they are using to do the difference. So that is your base year. So yeah. So total value of goods. So nominal GDP is current price. It doesn't consider inflation. Now when you net inflation value of these prices and then you calculate GDP, what you have is real GDP. GDP per capita is when you divide by the personal income of maybe the average personal income of your population. If you now divide it by GDP, you now do GDP per person income, or total, I think it's population. GDP per person income. So do you get, so your workforce and their earning income divided by GDP divided by that per person income. But I think they would now use average. So this is calculated by Nigerian Bureau of Statistics. So I think even the experts, they always wait for those results to ascertain, because except you work with them, you would not know how those calculations are actually made. Theoretically, it might differ for different countries, Not necessarily, there is a standard, but people align it to their own country, and they will have justification for actually calculating it that way. So there is a bit of back and forth. Different people, if you go online and you look at how is it calculated. So if you want to get more details, probably but we probably want to reach out to the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics to tell you specifics about the individual calculation. It's not like calculation is hard. Why I don't concentrate on those things, because I concentrate on the number and the components and their percentage increases. Now, if you are using a standard way of calculating every year, the same way you calculate this month is what you calculate next month, I do not care, because it nets off. Where I have a problem is if you are calculating it with a different formula every month. That's where you have a problem. But if you are calculating with the same formula every month, then it nets off. We are going to be able to infer or make conclusions from the data. Your data would actually make sense. So yeah. So the actual calculation, Nigerian Bureau of Statistics. But what you know is that the total value of goods and services that were actually produced in a country over a period of time, whether quarter or year, gives you the GDP number, gross domestic product. Population growth. Someone wonder why are you calling population growth? There was a time population growth was going at 2.5%. Nigerian GDP was going at, that's the rate at which increase in the number of people in the country. So population increase. So population growth, I think the last time I checked was around 2.5. GDP was around 2.9. This was like 2-3 years ago. was going at 2.9, that low. So people were concerned. At the time, I even think the Nigerian population growth was, Nigerian GDP was lower than its population growth. So the rate at which the population was growing, or the number of people in the country was increasing, is less than the rate at which the country was actually growing itself in terms of goods and services. What that means is that you will actually have, you will now begin to have high inflation, you begin to have high unemployment, because the people that you are giving birth to, or that the population is increasing by, the percentage that the population is increasing, who is going to employ them? If companies are not growing fast enough, or the economy is not going fast enough for you to actually accommodate those people in companies, there's actually going to be an issue. That's why when you look at GDP, next thing you look at population growth. So currently at 4.2, we are almost twice, we're going at twice our population growth. Somebody will still say it's low. Yes, it's low. Hopefully we get there, but it is better than where we are coming from. We are a bit like we are miles away from where we are coming. We are some miles away from where we are coming from. Not to be too optimistic. I'm a non-partisan politician. Interconnection of macroeconomics. So how do you relate it? How do all these jargons relate? Like I said, it's not just one jargon. It's not just one jargon. You get? All these things are interconnected. So inflation rate is high. When inflation rate result comes out, central bank look at Nigerian Bureau of Statistics. I'm talking with respect to Nigeria, but this applies to across to different countries. So you have to, in the US, they have their Fed rates, Fed cut rates. So that's their own. You get? And they have their CPI numbers. The Fed is the federal government or the federal bank. Yeah. Currently, I think the chairman of that bank is Jerome Powell. So you would have heard whenever Jerome Powell is talking, everybody wants to hear what he's going to say. So yeah. So because of that, so how does it connect? That was what I was saying. So how it connects is this. Inflation rate comes out given by Nigerian Bureau of Statistics. That data is taken by CBN. It looks at it. If it is high, it sets its MPR rates, its monetary policy rates, above that, slightly above that, to ensure that rate becomes the rates guiding every organization regulated by government on lending. So if you can't just be lending somebody money like that. You like at any rate you like. If not, banks will lend you money at 50%. They have to cap it at a particular rate. So they cap it there so that that rate becomes the benchmark. You are not supposed to go beyond this particular rate. So all banks, all government institutions, all mortgage banks, they use that rate to decide the rate at which they will give you mortgage loan, treasury bills rates, and then commercial bank loans. GDP, when you get your GDP number, you begin to infer, is population growth? Are we having growth? Are we not having growth? Do you get it? It helps you know. Now there's what we call recession. Recession is 2 consecutive quarters of contraction in the GDP numbers. So if the GDP numbers of a country reduces or in comparison to the previous quarter for 2 consecutive quarters, you say that country is in recession. That is numerical definition. I'm sure if you now want to look at real life application, you now look at the pulse of people, the cost of goods and services, unemployment rates. But when you are now talking of actually numerical definition, where you can, because always the thing is, when something is not numerical, it becomes perceptive. It is my perception might be different from your perception. For somebody that has been using business class all their life, and even with the whole high economy, they are still using business class. When you're speaking inflation or GDP, they do not understand. So we always use numbers to actually quantify this stuff so that we know, we can actually see when a country is in recession or not. Nigeria is not in recession. We had growth consecutively. The US, there have been a lot of calls that they might get to recession, but so far so good, I guess. And okay, so this stuff, one of the mandates of the CBN is actually to ensure that inflation rate stays as low as it can. So that is why MPRO comes. The major mandate of the CBN is to manage inflation rates, to ensure that inflation rate is within control. So when inflation rate increases, the MPR rate is increased. Why is it increased? So that treasury bills rates can increase. If treasury bills rates increases, more people will give their borrow money to government, reducing money in circulation. Less people will borrow money from banks because the borrowing rate from banks is low. So it will reduce the amount of money that businesses have to also do business, and so by so doing, money in circulation is reduced. If there's less money in circulation, you would see a drop in prices because people begin to look for cheaper alternative as against a more expensive alternative, forcing business owners to actually make the price as low as it can be. As on the opposing side, if you have more money in circulation, you just see price, it's like if you want to buy something of 1 naira with 100 naira, the chances that you would price is slim. But if you want to buy something of 1 naira with 3 naira, you're definitely going to beat it to the best price you can. So that's how it uses it to reduce inflation. Now, when inflation is down, MPR rate is low. Because of that, companies can borrow money, spurring economical goods, or manufacturing sector can begin to grow because they can take more loan and expand at a lower rate. So GDP numbers would increase in tangents. You get employment numbers would also increase while inflation stays low. So that's why you can see that the country is actually, or the CBN governor is actually gearing towards reducing inflation rates, not just because it has impacts on the price of goods and services and therefore affects the general populace. There are a lot of other things. The growth of the economy or the health of the economy is also dependent on that particular data. It is going down now. Hopefully it continuously go down. Next, inflation, I think we are still in harvest season. So after the harvest season, December, when we usually have spike in prices because of the festivities, we want to see what the inflation numbers come out as. Let's even see. We also, one other thing you notice about this month, I think there was a slight hike in the price of petrol. The price of petrol per liter moved from like 840 to 922. So let's see the impact that has on October inflation numbers. So all those things are things you actually look at and to infer. So it's not macro and minor indices. It's not just numbers. Those numbers are used to make decision and make inference. Then there's what they call currency devaluation. In 2020, I bought $300. That feels like a long time ago. But now you have to buy. Now it's like 1 for 70. In 2020, it was devalued. So devaluation is the deliberate reduction in the value of a currency by its government. So I think during the Goodluck Jonathan's era, it was devalued from like 100 to 165. I don't know the exact value of that, so I'm not going to bet. It was devalued in that time. I think even in Tinubu's government, it was devalued steadily. Now, somebody will be wondering, like, what do you mean devalued? Why can't you let it free float? So, it was 300, and then the government says the value is now 450. So what is happening is the government is instead of market forces, instead of demand and supply, I want to buy, how much are you willing to sell, to control the currency of the naira to other currencies. The government was pegging it. The government was subsidizing it. The government was saying, let's sell at this price. So anybody that wants to sell above, the government would give you at a particular price. That's where the BDC came, and then they will give you at the BDC price. The CBN will give BDC at the price they are declaring it officially at or devaluing it at, and those guys are forced to sell within a particular bandwidth of profits. So they have no choice, because well, they would want to do it because they are getting it at cheaper price. So there used to be that divide where what the government was giving was different from what the Bureau de change it was given as price. So if you want to buy from the government in terms of Form M or Form A, people that are doing medical and travel allowances and all, it was quite different from the price that the average man would get it on the street from the BDC. So that difference was because it wasn't due to market forces. The government was devaluing it, but it was pegging it at a particular price. In 2023, under President president, they actually devalued it. I think the person that devalued it was it Emefiele, or I'm trying to remember which CBN government was there that the devalue was. I think it's Cardoso, I don't know. But in 2023, it was officially devalued and then allowed for market floats. Partially, yes, somebody was like, but the government is still pumping in. But even if you go to bank, if you see the price at which the government is selling to even the Bureau de change, the difference is not much. The difference is actually not much. You would see maybe like a 20 naira difference as opposed to almost a 300 naira difference that we used to have. So it means the government, even if the government is subsidizing it at the say, they call it managed floats. Even if what we are doing is managed floats, the price or the price at which the central bank is selling is actually very, very, it's just almost as high as the BDC. So the advantage is no longer there. So even you, as somebody bringing your money from overseas, you just use the bank and sell through them because the difference is not so much anymore. So it was devalued and everything skyrocketed because it was around 400 at the time. It went to 700. I think it was early to 700. Then market forces pushed it to 15. Market forces, when you leave it and you say let market forces, it's a bit scary because coming from 300, 400 to 15, you can imagine the impact. That's almost like a 5 times increase. So it had a crazy impact even on inflation number up to the point that I was 33. But now we are seeing a rescending. The currency is appreciating, so it is becoming stronger against the dollar, even against the pounds. It's appreciating against foreign currency. So if you had looked at it, we started this year around 1.6, we are now at 1.470. So yeah, so that's currency devaluation. Currency depreciation is when it loses value. Appreciation is when it gains value against another currency. So right now it is appreciating. Prior to this time, 5 years ago, it was depreciating. So yeah, so it depreciates, it appreciates. You need to know how you invest under those conditions. The way you invest under a depreciating currency is quite different from the way you invest in an appreciating currency. Yeah. Compounding interest. So you invest the money, they give you an interest. When they give you your money and the interest, you don't take it out. You tell them the money, the principal plus the interest, we invest it, and then you get the same interest on the principal plus the former interest. When it comes again, the interest plus 2 more interest, you then get another interest. So you're compounding. You increase faster. It's like a geometric increase. Yeah, it's like a geometric increase.